wind was screaming so loud she couldn't hear herself pray. Octavia Turner was 18 years old, a black girl soaked through to the bone, dragging a white man twice her size across wet sand while lightning split the sky. His lips were blue, his pulse was a whisper, and she had no idea the gold ring on his pinky finger would, in less than 12 hours, bring 3 Navy destroyers, 6 Black Hawk helicopters, and a full Marine detachment to her tiny island off the coast of Virginia. She thought she was just saving an old man from the sea. She was wrong. She was saving someone the United States government had already deployed an entire fleet to find. And by sunrise, every powerful person in Washington would know her name. A black girl nobody had ever heard of. I've watched this story play out 3 times now, and I'm telling you, I still get goosebumps at the part where she calls that number. I'm Vance Narrator, and I dig up the small-town stories that should have stayed buried, but somehow didn't. This one starts on a Tuesday morning with a black girl on a forgotten island who didn't even know she was about to change her own life. The sun came up over Pelican Point Island the way it always did. Slow, golden, indifferent. Octavia Turner opened her eyes in her grandmother's bed. She still called it her grandmother's bed, even though May Turner had been gone 4 months now. 4 months since the funeral. 4 months since the small graveside ceremony with 7 people. 4 months since Octavia had walked back into this little wooden cottage and realized that for the first time in her 18 years on this earth, she was completely alone. She sat up slowly. The cracked window above the bed was held together with a strip of duct tape she'd put there in October. Outside, gulls were already arguing over something on the beach. She pulled on her grandmother's old gray sweatshirt, too big in the shoulders, perfect everywhere else, and padded barefoot to the kitchen. The cottage smelled like cedar and salt. It always had. She put a kettle on the wood stove. She made coffee from yesterday's grounds because new grounds cost $3 a bag, and she was being careful. She stood at the counter and looked at the photograph on the wall above the kitchen table, a black and white portrait of a young black woman in a 1944 Waves uniform, smiling like she'd just figured out a secret nobody else knew yet. Octavia kissed 2 fingers and pressed them gently to the frame. "Morning, Grandma." She did this every single day. She poured her coffee into a chipped blue mug and sat at the table. On the table was a thin envelope from Warwick Community College in Salisbury, Maryland. She'd been accepted to start the Marine Technology program back in August. She'd deferred it. She'd deferred it because the property tax bill on the cottage was now 4 months overdue, and she had 9 days until the county filed. $3,820. She'd been counting it down all summer. She'd sold her grandmother's old skiff motor for $300. She'd sold a set of fishing rods for $90. She'd worked 3 weddings on the mainland as a server, made another $600. She had, in a coffee can on the top shelf, exactly $942 to her name. She was $2,878 short. She folded the deferral letter very carefully and slid it back into the drawer with all the others. Outside, a gull screamed. Octavia looked up. She finished her coffee. She slid her feet into her grandmother's old rubber boots, also too big, also fine, and walked the 20 steps from the cottage door to the wooden shed she'd grown up calling May's Bait and Tackle. She unlocked the padlock. She turned on the single overhead bulb. She rearranged the same lures she'd been rearranging for weeks. 3 customers a week on a good week. Today was Tuesday. Tuesdays were never good weeks. A truck door slammed somewhere down the dirt road. She knew before she looked who it was. Walter Bennett, 64 years old, owner of the only general store on Pelican Point, walked past her shop on his way to open his own. He didn't wave. He never waved. "Morning, Mr. Bennett," Octavia called out anyway. He grunted, said nothing, kept walking. She watched him go. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter just a little before she let it go. Her grandmother had told her once, when she was 12 and crying about something Walter had said in front of a tourist family, "Baby, some people are scared of the wrong things. That's their problem. Don't make it yours." She held on to that. She held on to a lot of things her grandmother had said. A car pulled into her dirt driveway around 10. Octavia knew that car, too. A beat-up green Subaru with a Read Banned Books bumper sticker. Mrs. Eleanor Hartley, her old high school English teacher, climbed out with a covered dish in her hands. "I made too much chicken and dumplings," Mrs. Hartley said, the way she always said, as if she'd ever in her life made too much of anything. As if she didn't drive 22 miles every single week just to make sure Octavia was eating. Octavia hugged her, held on a second longer than usual. Mrs. Hartley pulled back and studied her face. "You sleepin'?" "Some." "You eatin'?" "Yes, ma'am." "Storm coming in tonight," Mrs. Hartley said. "Bad one. You call me if you need anything. Anything at all. I mean it, Octavia." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Hartley pressed her hand against Octavia's cheek for a moment. Then she got back in her Subaru and drove away. Octavia stood in the driveway for a minute after she left. The sky above the bay was a pale, washed-out blue, but she could see it. That thin gray line at the horizon, the kind that meant weather was coming. She walked down to the dock and sat with her feet hanging over the water. Far across the Chesapeake, she could just make out the gray smudge of the naval ships at Norfolk. They'd been there her whole life. She barely registered them anymore. A low gray helicopter passed overhead, heading south. She raised a hand in a half-wave. The helicopter banked away. She watched it disappear. Then she went back inside to tie down everything that wouldn't survive a storm. By 4 in the afternoon, the sky was the color of wet iron. By 6, the rain was sideways. By 8, the power was out. Octavia moved through the cottage by oil lamp, bolting the shutters one by one. She'd done this before. She'd done this with her grandmother every fall since she was 7 years old, and she could do the whole house in under 15 minutes with her eyes closed. Bolt the seaward shutters first, move the porch furniture inside, fill the bathtub with water in case the well pump quit, bring extra firewood up from the shed before it got soaked. She did all of it, methodically, calmly, the way her grandmother had taught her. A heavy fist hammered on her front door. She opened it. Walter Bennett stood there in a yellow rain slicker, water pouring off his hat. "Got 2 propane tanks behind the store getting tossed around," he said. He didn't look at her face. "Need a hand?" She didn't say anything. She just put on her own slicker and followed him out into the rain. They moved the tanks together. He gave instructions in 3-word sentences. She lifted her end without complaining, even when the metal handle bit into her palm. When they were done, he looked at her for the first time, opened his mouth, closed it again, and walked back to his store without saying thank you. She walked back home. She locked her door. She sat by the window with her grandmother's quilt around her shoulders and watched the storm come in. Her phone buzzed. Mrs. Hartley. "You okay, sweetheart? Roads are flooded out here. I can't drive in tonight." "I'm fine. Don't worry. I'll call you in the morning." "You promise?" "I promise." She put the phone down. She watched the white-capped waves swallow her dock, foot by foot. She thought about the 1962 Ash Wednesday storm her grandmother used to talk about, the one that had taken half the houses on the island. She prayed quietly for the people who were out on the water tonight. She did not yet know that one of them was about to wash up on her beach. First sighting of the flare. Around 9:30 she saw it, a faint orange glow, low on the water, somewhere out past the breakers. Then nothing. She leaned forward against the cold glass. It came again. Brighter this time. Definitely a flare. Octavia was on her feet before she'd decided to move. She grabbed her grandmother's old yellow rain slicker off the hook by the door, shoved a flashlight into her pocket, and stepped out into the storm. The wind almost knocked her off the porch. She braced. She lowered her head. She ran. The beach in front of the cottage was 100 yards of sand and broken shell. By the time she reached the waterline, her flashlight beam was small and weak against the rain. She swung it left, swung it right, saw foam, saw seaweed, saw nothing human. "Hello?" she screamed into the wind. "Anyone out here?" The wind ate her voice. She kept walking, north along the beach, boots filling up with cold water. Her flashlight finally caught something. A long fiberglass shard the size of a kitchen table, splintered down the middle. A torn orange life jacket. A wooden nameplate broken in half, the letters still readable. Halcyon. Pieces of a yacht. She started to run. She found him 50 yards farther up the beach. He was face down at the surf line, one arm tangled in a rope of seaweed, his body rolled by every incoming wave. An older white man in a shredded sailing jacket, gray hair plastered to his skull, blood from a gash on his temple washing pink into the sand. Octavia dropped to her knees beside him. She rolled him onto his back. His head lolled. His eyes were closed. His lips were the color of old ice. She put 2 shaking fingers against the side of his neck. Nothing. She pressed harder. Nothing. A wave crashed over both of them, sucking sand out from under her knees. She gasped. She was 18 years old. She was 5'3". She weighed 130 pounds, soaking wet. She was alone on a black beach in the middle of a storm with a man who weighed at least 180 pounds, dying in her arms. And the only training she had was a high school CPR certificate she'd earned 3 years ago. Her grandmother's voice came up from somewhere deep inside her chest, very calm, very clear. "You don't leave a soul to drown, baby. You don't ever leave a soul to drown." Octavia laced her fingers together. She placed the heel of her hand on the center of his chest, and she started. 1, 2, 3. She counted out loud because her grandmother had told her to count out loud. 4, 5, 6. The wind was screaming. The rain was coming sideways. Her arms were already burning. 7, 8, 9. His chest was wide and cold and didn't move. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, come on, come on." 20, 25, 30. She tilted his head back the way she'd been taught. She pinched his nose. She put her mouth over his and breathed twice, hard, into his lungs. His chest rose. She watched it fall. She went back to compressions. 1, 2, 3. A wave smashed over both of them. Salt water filled her boots. She kept counting. 18, 19, 20. Her tears were mixing with the rain on her face, and she didn't even know she was crying. "Please," she said, to no one and everyone. "Please, mister. Please." 2 more breaths, more compressions. She was about to start the 3rd cycle when his whole body convulsed. His mouth opened. Seawater poured out of him in a long, terrible rush, and he coughed. A wet, strangled cough that was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard in her life. She rolled him onto his side. She kept her hand on his back as he choked up more water. His pulse, when she pressed her fingers to his neck again, was there. Faint, but there. "Okay," she said, mostly to herself. "Okay. Okay." Now she had to get him out of the surf. She hooked her arms under his armpits. She pulled. He didn't move. She set her feet against the wet sand and pulled again, harder, leaning her whole 130 pounds back into it. He slid maybe 6 inches. She was going to have to drag him 200 yards. Octavia did not let herself think about that. She just started. 6 inches. Rest. 6 inches. Rest. A wave caught the back of her knees and almost took her down. She braced one hand against the sand and stayed upright. 6 more inches. Lightning split the sky over the cottage. She used the flash to find her line. 12 inches now. She was getting better at it. Her shoulders were screaming. Her lower back was on fire. She could feel a blister forming on her heel where her boot kept rubbing. She didn't stop. Halfway up the beach, she had to set him down for a minute. She put her hands on her knees and breathed. She looked down at his face. His eyes were still closed. The gash on his temple was still bleeding, pink in the rain. "You stay with me," she told him. "You hear me? You stay with me. I didn't drag you this far for you to quit on me now." She picked him up under the arms again. She pulled. The porch steps almost broke her. There were only 3 of them. They were slick with rain. He was dead weight. She got his shoulders up onto the first step, then the second. Then she had to crouch and shove with her legs to get him up the third one. She kicked the door open. She dragged him across the threshold and let him down, gently as she could, onto the rag rug in front of the wood stove. She locked the door behind them. The cottage was suddenly very, very quiet. She knelt beside him in a puddle of rainwater. She was shaking so hard she could barely undo the buckle on her own slicker. She forced herself to focus. Hypothermia first. That was the priority. She stripped off his sailing jacket. Heavy, soaked, useless. She unbuttoned his shirt and got it off him. His undershirt she left on, but she peeled it back to check for injuries. A long, shallow cut across his ribs, a bruise the size of a dinner plate over his right hip, a faded tattoo on his right forearm, an anchor with a small star above it, sharp and military and very precise. She didn't think about the tattoo. She thought about heat. She grabbed her grandmother's quilt off her own bed, the one she slept under every night, the one her grandmother had pieced together by hand in 1979, and she wrapped him in it. She fed the wood stove until it roared. She filled a metal pot with water from the bathtub and set it on the stove to heat. While it heated, she found her grandmother's old first aid kit and cleaned the gash on his temple with peroxide. He flinched. She froze. He went still again. She kept working. When the water was hot, she soaked clean rags in it and laid them over his neck and chest where the big arteries ran. She did this every 10 minutes. She built a second blanket layer, a third. Slowly, so slowly she almost didn't believe it. Color started coming back into his face. The long watch. She didn't sleep. She pulled her grandmother's wooden chair over next to the rug and sat by him. 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. She held 2 fingers to his wrist every few minutes, just to be sure his pulse was still there. It was always there. Faint, then steady, then stronger. Around 2:30, he mumbled something. She leaned in. "Aye," he said. "Aye, sir." Strange thing, she thought. She filed it away and kept watching. She noticed, sometime after 3, the gold ring on his left pinky finger. Old, worn smooth, with what looked like a star above an anchor stamped into it. She thought it was probably a wedding band, an old one. She left it alone. She talked to him quietly, the way her grandmother used to talk to her when she had a fever. "You're safe, mister. I've got you. You don't know me, but you're safe. My name is Octavia. My grandma was May Turner. She would have wanted me to take care of you, so that's what I'm doing." His hand twitched under hers, just barely. She squeezed it. "That's right. You stay right here with me." The first gray light came through the cracked window around 6:30. The rain had stopped. The wind was just a tired whisper now. Octavia set her forehead down on the edge of the rug very carefully so she wouldn't wake him. She'd been awake for almost 24 hours. Her hands had stopped shaking and started to feel numb. She hadn't eaten since lunch yesterday. He was breathing. He was warm. He was alive. She let herself cry, finally, for about 30 seconds. Then she wiped her face on the sleeve of her sweatshirt, got up, and put a kettle on. Yo, I gotta stop right here for a sec. Because, let's be real with each other. This girl is 18. 18. She just lost her grandma 4 months ago. She's about to lose her house. She's got $900 to her name. And she just spent 9 hours of her own body keeping a stranger alive in a hurricane. I'm sitting here wondering if I would have done that at 28, let alone 18. That's not a regular human being, fam. That's something else. Entirely. He woke up at 9:20 in the morning. Octavia was at the kitchen table cutting up an apple when she heard him stir. She set the knife down and came over. He was blinking at the wood beam ceiling like he wasn't sure where he was. "Easy," she said softly. "Slow. You don't have to sit up yet." He turned his head. His eyes were a pale, washed-out gray and very clear. They focused on her. "You pulled me out of the water," he said. His voice was a rasp. "Yes, sir." "By yourself?" "Yes, sir." He closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, they were wet. "What's your name, miss?" "Octavia. Octavia Turner. And I'm 18, sir. You can just call me Octavia." A small, tired smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. "Henry," he said. "Just Henry." She helped him sit up against the pillows. She brought him a glass of water. He drank it slowly with both hands, and his hands were shaking. His eyes drifted to the wall above the kitchen table. He saw the photograph. He stared at it for a very long time. Octavia watched his face. Something passed across it that she couldn't quite name. Not surprise, exactly. Something deeper. Something that almost looked like recognition, even though that didn't make any sense. "That's my grandmother," she said quietly. "She passed in June." "She served," Henry said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. Waves, 1944. He nodded slowly, his eyes still on the photograph. "My wife served, too." That was all he said. Mrs. Hartley arrives. A car pulled into the driveway around 10. Octavia got up to look out the window. The green Subaru was already parking. Mrs. Hartley came in without knocking, the way she always did, already talking. "Honey, the bridge just opened back up. I came as soon as—" She stopped. She saw the man on the rug. She saw the blood-soaked rags in the bowl. She saw Octavia's exhausted face. Octavia said very calmly, "Mrs. Hartley, this is Henry. He washed up last night. I did CPR. He's okay now. Can you sit down with us for a minute, please? I really need you to." Mrs. Hartley sat down. From that moment on, there were always 2 adults in the cottage with Octavia. She had asked for that without asking for it, and Mrs. Hartley had understood without needing it explained. Mrs. Hartley made tea. Henry thanked her. She thanked him for being alive in her former student's living room. Henry's wallet was on the table where Octavia had laid out his belongings to dry. He reached for it with a shaking hand and pulled out a thick wad of damp cash. She could see $100 bills in it, a lot of them. "For your trouble," he said, "and the blanket and whatever else." Octavia pushed the wallet gently back toward him. "No, sir. Please. I didn't pull you out for money. I know that, Henry said quietly. That's exactly why I'm offering. Octavia shook her head. Her voice was soft, but it didn't waver. My grandmother wouldn't have taken it. So I won't either. Mrs. Hartley reached over and squeezed her hand under the table. Henry studied her for a long moment. Then he reached back into his wallet and pulled out a small, plain white card. No name, no logo. Just a phone number printed in black, area code 703. Then do me a favor, he said. Just one. The phone's working again? Should be coming back. Call this number. When somebody answers, all you have to say is, Hawthorne is safe. That's it. They'll know what to do. Octavia took the card. She turned it over, blank on the back. Hawthorne? She said. It's a name some people know me by, Henry said. Please. My family is going to be very worried. Octavia nodded. She tucked the card into the front pocket of her grandmother's sweatshirt. She stepped onto the porch with her phone, found one bar of service, and dialed. A man's voice answered before the first ring even finished. He didn't say hello. He said, Identify. Octavia's mouth went dry. She glanced through the window at Mrs. Hartley and Henry in the kitchen. My name is Octavia Turner. I'm on Pelican Point Island. There's a man here. He told me to call this number and say, She swallowed. Hawthorne is safe. Silence. A very, very long silence. When the man spoke again, his voice had completely changed. Not louder, sharper. The way a knife is sharper than a butter knife. Miss Turner, listen to me very carefully. Stay exactly where you are. Keep him there. Do not leave the cottage. Do not let anyone else into the cottage. Help is on the way. Do you understand me? Yes, sir, but... Do you understand me, Miss Turner? Yes, sir. The line went dead. She lowered the phone slowly and stared at it. She walked back inside. Mrs. Hartley took one look at her face and stood up. Honey, what's wrong? I don't know, Octavia said. I don't know. She sat down across from Henry. She really looked at him this time. The pinky ring, that wasn't a wedding band. The little star above the anchor was too sharp, too intentional. It was an emblem, something military. The tattoo on his forearm, that wasn't some young man's drunken souvenir. The lines were precise. Old, but precise. And that thing he'd mumbled in his sleep last night. I, sir. Not yes. I. The way sailors talked. The way Navy men talked. Mr. Henry, she said quietly. Who are you? He met her eyes. He looked tired, almost sorry. I'll explain when they get here, he said. I owe you that. The heavy fist hammered on the front door. Mrs. Hartley jumped. Octavia got up. Walter Bennett was standing on the porch, hatless, his face the color of paper. Octavia, he said, Coast Guard cutters, 3 of them, coming in around the south side of the island right now. Radio's saying they're searching for somebody, some big somebody. A yacht went down last night out near the bay mouth. She stared at him. Octavia, Walter said, and his voice had something in it she'd never heard before, something that almost sounded like fear. Who is in your house? She didn't answer. She closed the door very softly. The faint mechanical hum she'd heard earlier was now a roar. She walked out onto her porch with Mrs. Hartley right behind her. Above the island, not 1 helicopter, 6. Naval gray, flying low in tight formation. Behind them, fanning out across the water in a wide half-circle around Pelican Point Island, were the unmistakable gray silhouettes of 3 Navy destroyers and a Coast Guard cutter. Her tiny island was being blockaded. Octavia's coffee mug slipped out of her hand and shattered on the porch boards. 2 of the Blackhawks sat down on the beach in front of the cottage. Sand whipped sideways in 80-mile-an-hour rotor wash. Octavia held onto the porch rail and ducked her head. Mrs. Hartley grabbed her elbow. 12 United States Marines climbed out of the helicopters in full tactical kit. A Navy doctor with a hard-shell medical case followed, and behind them, climbing out last and unhurried, was a tall man in a charcoal suit, somehow not even rumpled despite the wind. Walter Bennett was standing in his own yard with his mouth hanging open. Other neighbors were stepping out of their houses up and down the dirt road, staring. The man in the charcoal suit walked straight toward Octavia's cottage. The Marines fanned out in a precise perimeter around the property. He stopped 3 feet from her porch. He pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open. "Miss Turner, my name is Vincent Ashford. I am the chief of staff for the man who is currently in your living room. May I see him?" Octavia's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Sir?" she said very quietly. "Who is he?" Vincent Ashford paused. He really looked at her. He saw the blood stain on her sleeve, the dark circles under her eyes, the tremor in her hands. He saw Mrs. Hartley standing protectively at her side. His expression softened. "You don't know," he said. It wasn't a question. "He told me his name was Henry." A small, sad smile. "It is, among other things." The reveal. Vincent Ashford walked into the cottage with the doctor right behind him. 2 Marines stayed on the porch. The rest held the perimeter. Henry was sitting up against the pillows now. He was pale, but his eyes were sharp and clear. He smiled when he saw Vincent. "I told you they'd come," Henry said. "Sir," Vincent said. He stood at attention without thinking about it. "The President was briefed 40 minutes ago. The fleet stands down on your word." The room went absolutely silent. Octavia looked at Henry. "The President?" Vincent Ashford turned to her. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't have to. His voice carried the weight of everything it was about to say. "Miss Turner, the man whose life you saved is Admiral Henry Caldwell, United States Navy, retired. Former Chief of Naval Operations, recipient of the Navy Cross, currently the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Caldwell Maritime Industries, the principal shipbuilder for the United States Navy. He has been missing at sea since approximately 21:42 hours last night. Our entire Atlantic fleet was deployed to find him. Because of you, ma'am, they no longer have to." Octavia's legs went out from under her. Mrs. Hartley caught her elbow and lowered her into the kitchen chair before she hit the floor. Henry held up his pinky finger. The gold ring glinted in the lamplight. "Naval Academy class ring," he said gently. "Class of 74. I told you it wasn't a wedding band." He pulled back his sleeve and showed her the tattoo on his forearm. "Navy SEAL Trident. I got this in 1979. He smiled, tired. "And the eye, sir? Well, old habits." He looked at her with something like apology. "I gave you 3 clues last night, Octavia. The ring, the tattoo, the way I talked. You didn't notice any of them. And do you know why?" She shook her head, mute. "Because you weren't trying to figure out who I was," Henry said. "You were too busy trying to keep me alive. You only saw that I was. And that, young lady, is the rarest thing in the world." The grandmother connection. Henry turned, slowly, toward the photograph on the wall above the kitchen table. He looked at May Turner in her 1944 Waves uniform for a long, long time. When he spoke, his voice was very soft. "May Turner. Yeoman women accepted for volunteer emergency service. She was one of the first 72 black women admitted to the program when the Navy finally desegregated Waves in 1944. Octavia stared at him. How do you know that?" Henry's eyes were wet now. Because in 1976, he said, my late wife, Lieutenant Commander Yvette Caldwell, was a junior Navy surgeon. She was black. She was 26 years old, and she was about to walk away from the service entirely because she could not get a single mentor to take her seriously. He paused. He breathed. An older woman in the personnel office at Norfolk pulled her aside one afternoon, a retired senior yeoman, a volunteer at the base library. She told my wife exactly which 3 commanding officers to request and exactly what to say to each of them. My wife followed that advice. 2 of those 3 officers became her mentors. She had a 30-year career in naval medicine because of that conversation. He looked at the photograph. Yvette never met that woman again, but she remembered her name. She wrote it in the front of every notebook she ever owned. The name was May Turner. He raised his hand toward the photo, palm up, the way you greet an old friend across a crowded room. Hello, May. Octavia put both hands over her mouth. She started to cry. Mrs. Hartley was crying too, silently in the kitchen chair beside her. Outside the cottage, the Marines stood down. The Blackhawks idled. Somewhere on the road, Walter Bennett stood very still in his own yard, like a man who had just realized something about himself that he could never take back. The Atlantic Fleet held its position, and inside that little wooden cottage on Pelican Point Island, a black girl who had been one bank notice away from losing everything sat holding the hand of one of the most powerful men in the United States. A man whose life had hung 12 hours before on a high school CPR class and a quilt her grandmother had stitched together by hand in 1979. 3 days passed. Henry Caldwell was airlifted to Walter Reed for observation. He was discharged on the 2nd morning, stubborn as a mule, against medical advice. Octavia stayed home. She refused every interview. She turned away 3 news vans and a freelance photographer who had somehow gotten across the bridge. She told Diana Whitfield, the local reporter from the Eastern Shore Gazette, the only journalist she led onto the porch, exactly one thing. I would have done it for anybody. So please write that, ma'am, and please don't write anything else about me. Diana wrote exactly that. The Associated Press picked it up the next morning. The Visit, a black SUV pulled up to her dock. Henry Caldwell stepped out, leaning on a polished wooden cane. Behind him came Vincent Ashford, an attorney named Catherine Caldwell Brooks, Henry's daughter, and a small, dignified black woman in her 60s who introduced herself as Dr. Elizabeth Calloway, the executive director of the Yvette Caldwell Memorial Trust. Mrs. Hartley was already at the cottage. Octavia had asked her to be there. She wasn't going through this conversation alone. They sat on the porch in the warm October sun, drinking sweet tea Mrs. Hartley had made. Henry spoke first. Octavia, I'm not going to insult you with money. Octavia exhaled. She'd been afraid of that. But I am going to insult you with opportunity, Henry said, because what you did for me, and what your grandmother did for my wife 49 years ago without ever knowing it, that is not a debt that gets settled. That is a legacy that gets continued. Mrs. Hartley reached over and squeezed Octavia's hand. The offer, point by point. Catherine Caldwell Brooks opened a leather portfolio and took out a single sheet of paper. Number 1, she said gently, your property tax bill. $3,820, paid in full this morning. The deed to this cottage has been transferred into a protective trust in your name. There is no mortgage. There is no lien. There never will be. This house is yours, Miss Turner. Permanently. Octavia stopped breathing for a second. Number 2, Catherine continued. The May Turner Maritime Scholarship, $25 million in initial endowment, funded by Caldwell Maritime Industries in perpetuity, awarded annually to black women pursuing careers in marine engineering, marine biology, naval architecture, or Coast Guard service. 2-year community college programs are eligible alongside 4-year institutions. Vocational programs are eligible. You name a path that has anything to do with the water, the scholarship will fund it. Mrs. Hartley made a small, choked sound. Number 3, Catherine said. Your own education. Effective immediately, the trust will pay your full tuition, room, board, books, and a modest living stipend for any institution you choose to attend at any level for as long as you want to be a student. You deferred Warwick this fall. If you want to start in spring instead, that's already arranged. If you want to apply to Hampton University or the University of Maryland or anywhere else, that's your call. You decide. We pay. Bigger plans. Henry leaned forward on his cane. Number 4, we would like to convert May's Bait and Tackle into a small community resource center and historical site. The May Turner Maritime Heritage Center. Your grandmother's wave service records, photographs, a reading room, scholarship application packets, a small museum, but a working one. And Mrs. Hartley here, if she is willing, Mrs. Hartley's head came up, would direct it on a full salary while you finish your degree. When you graduate, the directorship is yours, if you want it. The bait shop side stays, because that part, Henry said with a small smile, is yours and your grandmother's, and it always will be. Mrs. Hartley was openly crying now. Number 5, Henry said, Pelican Point Island. I have personally lobbied for, and the federal government has approved, a $2.3 million hurricane resilience and dock infrastructure grant for this entire island. New seawall, new public dock, generators for every household that wants one. Every single resident benefits, including, Henry said quietly, Mr. Walter Bennett. Octavia closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened her eyes, she was very calm. Sir, she said, thank you. I don't have the words, but I want to ask you one thing. Anything. The scholarship. You said community college is eligible. I want it to stay that way. I want it written into the charter, not just for now, forever. Because the truth is, sir, every smart girl in this country has heard of the Naval Academy. But not every smart girl has somebody in her life who knows how to apply to one. Every smart girl has heard of her local community college. Some of those girls are going to build the next aircraft carrier you sell to the Navy. They just don't know it yet. Henry looked at his daughter. Catherine was already writing. Done, Catherine said. Charter language, permanent, effective today. Henry held out his hand to Octavia. She took it. Your grandmother, Henry said quietly, would be proud of you. Your wife, Octavia said back just as quietly, would be proud of you. They shook on it. Mrs. Hartley had to turn away to wipe her face. In the bay beyond the porch, a single white sail tacked across the wind. A gull cried. The October sun was warm on the wood planks. Octavia thought about her grandmother. She thought about what May had said the day she gave her the keys to the cottage. When you don't have anything else, you have land. And when you have land, you have a chance. She'd had a chance. She'd taken it. 6 months later, Pelican Point Island looked different. The new public dock was finished in April. The seawall was reinforced and resurfaced by May. The lighthouse, which had been peeling for 15 years, got a fresh coat of paint courtesy of a Coast Guard volunteer crew who came out one Saturday and refused to be paid. Walter Bennett's general store stayed Walter Bennett's general store. But Walter Bennett was different. He started leaving covered casseroles on Octavia's porch on Sunday evenings. They never spoke about it. He referred 3 customers to May's Bait and Tackle in a single week in March, the most referrals he'd ever sent her. One Tuesday in late spring, he showed up at her door with a small, scarred wooden box. Was your grandmother's, he said. He didn't quite meet her eyes. She loaned it to me about 20 years ago. I've been meaning to give it back. Inside the box, an old set of fishing weights, and a handwritten note in May's careful cursive that said, "Walter, in case you ever come around. Love, May." He stood on the porch a long time after he handed it over. Octavia made him a cup of coffee. He drank it. He went home. Things between them weren't fixed, but things between them had started. The Heritage Center, Maritime Heritage Center, opened on the 4th of July. There was a ribbon cutting. There was a small brass band from the Norfolk Naval Base. There were over 200 people standing on the dirt road, more people than Pelican Point had seen in one place in 50 years. The main display case held May Turner's Waves uniform, donated by a distant cousin in Baltimore who had kept it in storage for 48 years. Beside it was the original 1944 photograph from Octavia's kitchen wall, blown up to poster size. A small bronze plaque read, "For every girl who was told the water wasn't for her." Mrs. Hartley gave the dedication speech. She kept it short. She read 3 lines from a poem and then thanked Octavia, and then she stepped back from the microphone before her voice could break. Octavia at college. Octavia started at Hampton University in the fall semester, marine engineering, with a minor in maritime history. She lived in a dorm for the first time in her life. Her roommate was a girl from Atlanta named Brianna Wilson, who liked the same music and snored like a small lawnmower. Octavia had never had a friend her own age before. She decided she liked it. She called Mrs. Hartley every Sunday night. She got letters from Henry Caldwell once a month. Actual paper letters, the old-fashioned kind, written in fountain pen. He told her about his late wife, about Navy life in the 70s, about what it had been like to grow up in a country where he had to learn how to be a husband to a black woman in a profession that didn't want her there. He told her things he hadn't told anyone in 40 years. She wrote back. She told him about her professors, about her physics homework, about how Brianna had decided they were both going to learn to surf next summer. She called him Mr. Caldwell. He called her Miss Turner. They both preferred it that way. The first May Turner Scholar was announced in March of the following year. Her name was Lily Brooks. She was 19. She was from Hampton, Virginia. She had just been accepted into the United States Coast Guard Academy. Henry Caldwell flew to Norfolk for the announcement. So did Catherine. So did Dr. Calloway. So did Octavia, who flew up from her dorm room with a borrowed blazer and a speech she'd written 6 times. Lily Brooks's mother, a single mom who had worked 2 jobs through her daughter's entire high school career, who had made the impossible monthly choice between rent and college application fees 3 years running, sat in the front row in a borrowed dress and could not stop crying. Lily's acceptance speech was 1 sentence long. She walked up to the microphone. She took a breath. She looked out at the audience. "My mama always told me," Lily said, "that the water doesn't ask what color you are before it carries you. And starting today, neither does the United States Coast Guard." The whole room stood up. The whole room. 3 years later, another storm came in. Octavia was 21 now, a senior at Hampton. She'd come home for Thanksgiving break. The cottage was warm. The wood stove was lit. Mrs. Hartley was on the mainland with her sister. Octavia was checking the dock lines just before dark when her flashlight beam caught something against the seawall. A small figure, huddled, soaking wet. A teenage girl, white, maybe 14, bruise on her cheek, a backpack at her feet. She'd come over on the last ferry. She'd missed her stop. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know where to go. Octavia didn't ask any questions. She wrapped the girl in her grandmother's quilt, the same quilt, still, and sat her by the wood stove and gave her hot chocolate from the same chipped blue mug. She called Sheriff Caroline Hayes. She called Mrs. Hartley. She called the runaway hotline. The girl fell asleep on the couch holding the corner of the quilt the way a much younger child would. Octavia stood by the window and watched the rain. "You're safe," she said quietly, mostly to herself. "You don't know me. but you're safe. By morning, a black SUV was in the driveway. Henry Caldwell was 74 years old now. He moved a little slower. His cane was the same. He sat in the kitchen across from the sleeping girl, watching over her gently while Octavia made pancakes. The girl woke up. She blinked at Henry. Her eyes went wide. Henry smiled. "Good morning," he said softly. "My name is Henry. You're in good hands here. Trust me. I'd know." The wall above the kitchen table had grown. The 1944 photograph of May was still there in the center, where it had always been. Around it now hung other photos. Yvette Caldwell in her navy whites in 1976. Octavia and Henry on this very porch in 2024. Octavia in her cap and gown at her Hampton graduation in May. Lily Brooks in her Coast Guard officer's uniform, first in her class. 3 generations on a single wall. One unbroken line of women who refused to let the water belong to anyone else. Octavia stood on her porch at dawn. The sea was calm. The lighthouse blinked white. A gray Navy helicopter passed far overhead, routine patrol, and dipped its rotor in a small salute as it banked south. Octavia raised her coffee mug toward it. She didn't have to wonder anymore who was flying it. She just waved back. The hand-carved wooden sign above the door of the bait shop reads, May Turner Maritime Heritage Center and Bait Shop, open daily. The morning sun catches the brass plaque beside it. A girl on a bicycle rides past on the dirt road. A gull cries somewhere over the water. Inside, Octavia Turner is unlocking the door for another day. She kisses 2 fingers. She presses them to the photograph of her grandmother on the wall. Morning, Grandma. She does this every single day. Look, I'm gonna ask y'all something real. Who in your life is your May Turner? Tell me down in the comments, because the whole point of this story is that quiet kindness doesn't disappear. It just travels, sometimes for 49 years, before it lands. So drop their name below. Smash that like button so the algorithm shows this to somebody who needs it tonight. And hit subscribe so we keep finding stories like this together. I love y'all. I'll catch you in the next one.